Gentlemen, welcome.
Today is my distinct pleasure to introduce a man who is recognized...
The battle of evolution is only one skirmish in a much larger war.
Science simply makes no use of the hypothesis of God.
Ask yourself, what has intelligent design given us? Nothing.
We cannot accept intelligent design as an alternative scientific theory.
They will never accept that we have a better argument. They just pester us and they waste our time.
Civil rights, to how to ruin your life in 10 easy steps. Today, Ben is speaking on the topic that has become increasingly important to him over recent years. While Ben has always been an ardent supporter of science, lately he has noticed an alarming trend in the scientific establishment that could have dire consequences for every American. Without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome for Mr. Ben Stein.
Freedom is the essence of America. We're talking about freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom from fear, freedom of religion. Martin Luther King said, America is essentially a dream, and he said it is a dream of freedom and equality, and freedom is the way to equality. And America simply would not be America without freedom. In every turning point in our history, the decision has always been about freedom.
Freedom is what makes this country great. Freedom has allowed us to create, to explore, to overcome every challenge we have faced as a nation. But imagine if these freedoms were taken away. Where would we be? What would we lose? Well, unfortunately, I no longer need to imagine. It's happening. We are losing our freedom in one of the most important sectors of society, science. I have always assumed that scientists were free to ask any question, to pursue any line of inquiry without fear of reprisal. But recently, I've been alarmed to discover that this is not the case. It all began when I met evolutionary biologist Richard Sternberg in Washington, D.C. His life was nearly ruined when he strayed from the party line while serving as editor of a scientific journal affiliated with the prestigious Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. What was Dr. Sternberg's crime? He dared to publish an article by Dr. Stephen Meyer, one of the leading lights of the intelligent design movement. The paper ignited a firestorm of controversy merely because it suggested intelligent design might be able to explain how life began. As a result, Dr. Sternberg lost his office, his political and religious beliefs were investigated, and he was pressured to resign.
The questioning of Darwinism was a bridge too far for many. People were so upset about it. They were so upset that you could see they had a physical, emotional reaction.
Wow.
They were saying that Stephen C. Meyer is a well-known Christian, that Stephen C. Meyer is an intelligent design proponent, that Stephen C. Meyer is a Republican. It was all couched in terms of religion, politics, and sociology. The way the chair of the department put it is that I was viewed as an intellectual terrorist.
Terrorist.
George Mason University. Throughout its 50-year history, our mission has remained clear: to prepare a diverse population of students to think and to grow in a climate of unbridled academic freedom.
After Dr. Caroline Crocker simply mentioned intelligent design in her cell biology class at George Mason University, her promising academic career came to an abrupt end.
My supervisor invited me into his office. He said, "I'm going to have to discipline you for teaching creationism." And I said, I mentioned intelligent design on a couple of slides, but I did not teach creationism. He said, "Nonetheless, you have to be disciplined." At the end of the semester, I lost my job.
Not only did this well-loved professor lose her job at George Mason, she suddenly found herself blacklisted, unable to find a job anywhere.
I was only trying to teach what the university stands for, which is academic freedom.
There's nothing to be learned in neurosurgery by assuming an accidental origin for the parts of the brain that we work on.
It wasn't just biologists who were feeling the Darwinist wrath. When neurosurgeon Michael Egnor wrote an essay to high school students saying doctors didn't need to study evolution in order to practice medicine, the Darwinists were quick to try and exterminate this new threat.
A lot of people on a lot of blogs called me unprintable names that were printed. There are a lot of very, very nasty comments. Other people suggested that people call the university I work at and suggested perhaps it's time for me to retire. I realized when I kind of went public with my doubts about the adequacy of Darwin's theory that I would encounter criticism. What has amazed me is the viciousness and the sort of baseness of it.
People really get emotional about this. Whenever you say intelligent design in a room of academics, them's fighting words.
Creationists. Astronomer Guillermo Gonzalez found himself in a fierce shootout with Iowa State University following the publication of his book, arguing that the universe is intelligently designed. Despite a stellar research record that has led to the discovery of several planets, his application for tenure was denied, putting his career in jeopardy. Dr. Gonzalez had this advice for scientists who might be thinking about following his example.
If they value their careers, they should keep quiet about their intelligent design views.
We know there are times and places to be quiet, and other times and places when we can make noise if we want to.
It's really very stupid as well. Everybody knows science education in America is appalling. What we don't need at this time is intelligent design in the classrooms.
To present intelligent design stunts their educational growth. It stunts their intellectual growth.
But what I don't understand is how these animals could have been on Earth millions of years before man. And the Bible says the whole Earth was created in only 6 days.
It wasn't just the educational aspects of intelligent design that had scientists concerned. Many suspected the movement masked a much larger agenda.
Intelligent design is a set of excuses to squeeze creationism into the classrooms.
Get intelligent design in the schools today, and we can have school prayers tomorrow.
Any other complaints?
Can you imagine anything more boring? The boredom attached to ID is supreme. It is so boring that I can't even bother to think about it much anymore.
We're like the little boy that said the emperor has no clothes, and he didn't have a big organization either.
When you go around and raise funds, your people are not saying to you, by the way, we're going to get all these scientists out of the classroom and put Christ back in the classroom.
Well, I don't know that Christ has ever been in the science classroom. This is not a religious argument. This is something that people, we have fellows who are Jewish or agnostic or various other things. There are people, there are Muslim scientists, there are people of all kinds of backgrounds who agree that Darwin's theory has failed. And so why would you bring religion into it? You don't need religion. This is a red herring, and people who don't have an argument are reduced to throwing sand in your eyes.
Well, if the Discovery Institute could get its wish about this subject, what would your wish be?
Well, on this subject, as on others, we'd like people to be able to have a robust dialogue and even a debate where the evidence, the best evidence, in this case, the best scientific evidence is made available to people.
Well, surely no one questions there should be a debate.
Oh, yes, they do.
They do?
They say the debate has been settled.
Well,
that the issue's
when
settled.
was the debate settled?
Ben, I'd like you to talk to the scientists. You don't want to get your science from me.
Mr. Chapman claimed ID had nothing to do with religion. So why was my first stop Biola University, formerly known as the Bible Institute of Los Angeles?
Your own personal Jesus.
How much money have you ever gotten from Jerry Falwell?
$0.
How about Pat Robertson?
0.
Are you a minister?
No.
Are you a priest?
No.
Pastor?
No.
Youth pastor?
Oh, I did teach Sunday school once.
Has this all been resolved? I mean, aren't we all Darwinists now? Except for a few cranks like you?
Well, it's a funny thing that questions that aren't properly answered don't go away. This question is loaded with all kinds of political baggage, but one-on-one at a scientific meeting after the third or fourth beer, my experience has been that many evolutionary biologists will say, yeah, this theory's got a lot of problems.
So you're meaning to tell me that there really is a debate among scientists about whether or not evolution occurred?
Well, evolution is a kind of funny word. It depends on how one defines it. If it means simply change over time, even the most rock-ribbed fundamentalist knows that the history of the Earth has changed, that there's been change over time. If you define evolution precisely, though, to mean the common descent of all life on Earth from a single ancestor via undirected mutation and natural selection, that's textbook definition of neo-Darwinism, biologists of the first rank have real questions.
But the modern theory of intelligent design is just microwaved creationism.
I don't think that's the case. Creationism, properly understood, begins with the Bible and says, how can I fit the Bible into the data of science?
Dr. Nelson didn't sound like a crazy person, but I still suspected ID was nothing but reheated creationism. My next stop didn't seem like it was going to alleviate those fears.
Evolution is, from an intelligent design perspective, is perfectly acceptable if the sense is that how did the design get implemented? The issue is there real design there, and are these material mechanisms like natural selection, are these adequate to account for everything we see in biology? And our argument is no, it's not.
But Darwin produced all this evidence from his travels and his studies at the Galapagos that evolution explained things.
If you look at the history of science, people often have a good idea and then they decide just to run with it. And they say, we're going to apply this everywhere. And so Darwin takes his idea of natural selection and says, I'm going to explain all of life with it. I mean, physics used to be Newtonian physics. Newton was physics. And then you got to look to Einstein, general relativity. It's not, Newton isn't enough. Well, I think likewise what we're finding with Darwin is that he had some valid insights, but it's not the whole picture.
Okay, Darwinism may not be the complete picture, but what made these guys think they had the missing pieces? I put this question to Dr. Stephen Meyer, author of the paper that originally got Dr. Sternberg in so much trouble. It's hard to believe that this little town is the headquarters of giant Microsoft, which enabled Mr. Gates to become fantastically rich. Maybe that's what Steve Meyer's doing. Newton is buried in the geniuses corner at Westminster Abbey, right?
That's correct, yeah. Darwin is also buried in Westminster Abbey.
Right, and so is Darwin. Right near each other, right? And you're here in Redmond in a little building without a sign, right? And you're obviously an incredibly smart guy, but how dare you challenge someone who's buried in the geniuses corner next to Newton at Westminster Abbey?
Well, it may seem a little cheeky, but it's what scientists are supposed to do. When I was in Cambridge, one of my supervisors often advised us to beware the sound of one hand clapping, which was a way of saying if there's an argument on one side, there's bound to be an argument on the other. And what I found in studying the structure of the argument in The Origin of Species is that for every evidence-based argument for one of Darwin's two key propositions, there is an evidence-based counter-argument.
Well, but is it a debate? I mean, there's just you and a couple of other guys in a dinky little office downtown, say on one side, and there's the faculties of all the great universities of the world on the other side.
Speaking with a great uniform and authoritative voice.
Right.
Yeah. Well, in any case, the debate really isn't going to be settled by numbers. It's going to be settled by the evidence and the arguments.
While I was still in Bill Gates country, Dr. Meyer recommended I check in with molecular biologist Jonathan Wells. What kind of names do they call you?
Creationist.
What do you say back to them when they say you're a creationist?
Well, I usually don't get the opportunity.
What's at stake for you personally here?
First of all, I love science. I think the way Darwinism corrupts the evidence, distorts the evidence, is bad for science.
Well, the other scientists would tell you to just shut up if you love science, okay? Because you're sort of being a bomb thrower into science.
I am upsetting the apple cart, and I think it deserves to be upset in this case.
Why?
Because the evidence is being distorted to prop up a theory that I think doesn't fit it.
Was Darwinism really that bad? Perhaps a change of scenery would give me a fresh perspective.
Car je t'ai vu au coin de la rue, tout est vide, j'ai cru que tous les deux.
Wow, this is fabulous.
Let's put it this way. Before you can ask, is Darwinian theory correct or not, you have to ask the preliminary question, is it clear enough so that it could be correct? That's a very different question. One of my prevailing doctrines about Darwinian theory is, man, that thing is just a mess. It's like looking into a room full of smoke. Nothing in the theory is precisely, clearly, carefully defined or delineated. It lacks all of the rigor one expects from mathematical physics, and mathematical physics lacks all of the rigor one expects from mathematics. So we're talking about a gradual descent down the level of intelligibility until we reach evolutionary biology. We don't even know what a species is, for heaven's sakes.
So his theory is smoke, but elegant smoke.
There's a certain elegance to it, but you know, I think Einstein had the appropriate remark. He preferred to leave elegance to his tailor.
A room full of smoke? That certainly wasn't what I was hearing from prominent Darwinists like Richard Dawkins.
Evolution is a fact. It's a fact which is established as securely as essentially any other fact that we have in science.
Richard Dawkins is so confident that evolution is a fact, and that therefore God doesn't exist, that he has devoted his entire life to spreading the evolution gospel.
I'm an atheist with respect to the Judeo-Christian God because there is not a shred of evidence in favor of the Judeo-Christian God. It is completely right to say that since the evidence for evolution is so absolutely, totally overwhelming, nobody who looks at it could possibly doubt that if they were sane and not stupid. So the only remaining possibility is that they're ignorant, and most people who don't believe in evolution are indeed ignorant.
But the people I spoke with weren't ignorant. They were highly credentialed scientists. So there had to be something else going on here. So you think the whole theory of evolution is false, or just certain parts of it?
Well, again, evolution is a slippery word. I would say minor changes within species happen. But Darwin didn't write a book called How Existing Species Change Over Time. He wrote a book called The Origin of Species. He purported to show how this same process leads to new species, in fact, every species. And the evidence for that grand claim is, in my opinion, almost totally lacking.
How does Darwin or Darwinism say life began?
Well, he didn't know, and in fact, nobody knows. So Darwinism, strictly defined, starts after the origin of life and deals only with living things.
Well, how can there be a theory about life without a theory about how life began?
Well, a grand overarching evolutionary story, of course, does include the origin of life, but Darwin's theory doesn't begin until you have the first cell.
Well, does someone have a theory about how life began?
This is the story of a small planet in space called Earth.
For a typical Darwinian explanation of how life originated, Dr. Wells directed me toward this documentary.
The chemical elements essential for life, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen, were now in place. What was needed was a way of combining them. Perhaps the energy came from lightning. Whatever it was.
Excuse me?
Whatever it was, energy managed to arrange these chemical ingredients in just the right way.
Whatever it was? I was hoping for something a little more scientific. The most popular idea has been that life emerged spontaneously from primordial soup. In 1953, Stanley Miller mixed water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen to simulate the early Earth's atmosphere. Then he ran electricity through it in an attempt to jumpstart life.
It's alive! It's alive!
It didn't work. While the initial results seemed promising, 50 years later, most serious scientists have abandoned this approach in favor of alternate theories. Prominent Darwinist Michael Roos attempted to explain one of them to me. He wasn't kidding. How did we get from an inorganic world to the world of the cell?
Well, one popular theory is that it might have started off on the backs of crystals.
My crystal ball.
molecules piggybacked on the back of crystals forming, and that this led to more and more complex. But of course, the nice thing about crystals is every now and then you get mistakes, mutations, and that this opens the way for natural selection.
But at one point there was not a living thing,
yeah,
and then there was a living thing. How did that happen?
Well, that's just I've just told you. And I don't see any reason why you shouldn't go from very simple to more and more complex to more and more complex.
I don't either, but I don't know how you get from mud to a living cell. That's my question.
Yes, well, I've told you.
I think it was on the
try
back
one
of
more
crystals.
time.
On the backs of crystals.
On the backs of crystals is at least one hypothesis, yes.
So that's your theory, and you think that is more likely and less far-fetched than intelligent design?
I think it is.
I wouldn't put Ben Stein's money on Dr. Roos's joyriding crystals, but it did make me wonder, what were the chances of life arising on its own?
It's been speculated that probably there would have to be a minimum of about 250 proteins to provide a minimal life function. If that's really true, then I think it's almost inconceivable that life could have happened in some simple step-by-step way.
Okay, so the simplest form of life requires at least 250 proteins to function. What's so difficult about that?
Welcome to the Casino of Life. Who wants to spin for a chance to win?
Oh, sure. I'll give it a shot. What do I win?
Take a look at this.
Huh? How about the world's first single-cell organism? This perfectly aligned string of proteins could be yours.
Now, take a spin.
I won.
Tina, tell him how many times he needs to do that to win the prize.
250.
That's right, folks, and all in the correct order.
But that's impossible.
We've heard that before, haven't we, Richard?
Come on, Mother Nature, do your thing. You stupid machine! I hate you!
We're talking about something that's staggeringly improbable, roughly 1 in a trillion.
Let all of life choose a million, a trillion. The number is essentially zero. Something has to skew nature to choose the ones that work.
No matter how life began, on the backs of crystals or in the test tube of some intelligent designer, everyone agrees it started with a single cell. But what is a cell? Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Darwin wrote The Origin of Species in 1859, published it in 1859. He had an idea of the cell as being quite simple, correct?
Yeah, everybody did.
Okay. If he thought of the cell as being a Buick, what is the cell now in terms of its complexity by comparison?
A galaxy.
If Darwin thought a cell was, say, a mud hut, what do we now know that a cell is?
More complicated than a Saturn V.
So what is in a cell as far as we know now?
A world that Darwin never could have imagined.
I needed someone who could give me a glimpse into this world. So we went to molecular biologist Doug Axe.
Think of a cell as being a nanofactory, a factory where, on a very small scale, digital instructions are being used to make the components of the factory. Here we have the famous DNA double helix. You can see the two helical strands that are intertwined and wind around each other on the outside of the molecule. This is the material that stores all of our genetic information. In higher life forms, this will be the equivalent of something like a gigabyte of information stored in the molecules that form the individual chromosomes, all packed within the nucleus, which is a tiny fraction of the entire cell size. So what does DNA do? Well, the information in DNA ends up providing the information for sequencing the amino acids to make proteins. We have information in a one-dimensional form that provides the information for a three-dimensional form.
The cell really is like nothing we've ever seen in the physical world. That's got to be firmly grasped. That's not something we can just say, oh, well, it's just a little bit more of the same old, same old. It's not the same old, same old.
we are finding is that there's information that's in the cell that cannot be accounted for in terms of these undirected material causes. So these,
it has to be.
And so there's some other, so it has to be an information source.
So one of the key questions faced by modern biology is, where do you get information from?
Well, Darwin assumed that the increase in information comes from natural selection. But natural selection reduces genetic information, and we know this from all the genetic population studies that we have.
And where does the new genetic information going to come from?
Well, that's the big question.
So when we find information in the DNA molecule, the most likely explanation is that it too had an intelligent source.
I mean, we need engineering principles to understand these systems, okay? I mean, it's only because of our advancements in nanotechnology that we can even begin to appreciate these systems.
We're very concerned because in the late 70s and early 80s, there were a lot of attempts to pass equal time for creation science and evolution laws. And clearly, this is something that neither scientists nor teachers liked. It wasn't exactly help, the creationists are coming, but it's, kind of along those lines. Most scientists just throw up their hands and say, creationists, they drive me crazy, you handle it. We've worked a lot with science education organizations. The most important group we work with is members of the faith community, because the best kept secret in this controversy is that Catholics and mainstream Protestants are okay on evolution.
Are you sure about that, Eugenie?
Liberal Christians have been fighting with conservative Christians for so long that they'll side with anybody against the fundamentalists. And Eugenie Scott says, well, welcome over.
There's a kind of science defense lobby, or an evolution defense lobby in particular. They are mostly atheists, but they are desperately wanting to be friendly to mainstream, sensible religious people. And the way you do that is to tell them that there's no incompatibility between science and religion.
But is there really an incompatibility? Can't we believe in God and Darwin?
Implicit in most evolutionary theory is that either there's no God or God can't have any role in it. So naturally, as many evolutionists will say, it's the strongest engine for atheism.
I believe that we get coverage, but we always get coverage like we're the outsider, not like it's an even debate.
Just admit it, it's religion.
Very simple.
You just can't, it's religion.
It's a wanton distortion of our position.
Study desk. I've got a hot story here.
You can look at Associated Press stories, and the same sentence will appear in those stories for 10 years. Intelligent design says that life is too complex. It's called a boilerplate. And the reporter never reports anymore or gets any new ways to say it, so the public understanding never advances.
But what happens if a reporter decides to take a more balanced approach to intelligent design?
There might be remarkable pressure on that reporter not to side against the evolutionists.
I thought I told you to kill that story.
Few reporters have learned this better than author and journalist Pamela Winnick. When she refused to take sides in an article she wrote about intelligent design, the Darwinists found a new favorite target.
Number one, I wasn't Christian, I was Jewish. Number two, I wasn't religious. Number three, I was not taking a position in favor of creationism. I was writing about intelligent design, and it didn't matter. After I wrote that one piece, everything I wrote on the subject was scrutinized. There were hate letters coming into the newspaper. If you give any credence to it whatsoever, which means just writing about it, you are just finished as a journalist.
This conflict over the principles of evolution has become a religious war. It really is no longer about scientific investigation.
It is total competition with an antagonist who is putting into it everything within his capability.
The situation has reached a point where many of evolution's top apologists have switched from defending Darwinism to attacking religion. Richard Dawkins is the best example of this. His recent book, The God Delusion, has sold over 1 million copies worldwide.
The God Delusion is my long-expected, long-worked-on, full-frontal attack on religion. To me, science is about trying to explain existence And religion is about trying to explain existence. It's just that religion gets the wrong answer.
But is Dawkins correct? Are science and religion really at war? Oxford professor Alistair McGrath, author of The Dawkins Delusion, seemed like the ideal person to answer my question.
Richard Dawkins has a charming and very, I think, interesting view of the relationship between science and religion. They're at war with each other, and in the end, one's got to win, and it's going to be science. It's a very naive view. It's based on a complete historical misrepresentation of the way science and religion have interacted. Dawkins seems to think that a scientific description is an anti-religious argument. Describing how something happens scientifically somehow explains it away. It doesn't. But the questions of purpose, intentionality, the question why, still remain there on the table.
And I think it was just a catastrophic mistake to have someone like Dawkins address himself to profound issues of theology, the existence of God, the nature of life. He hasn't committed himself to disciplined study in any relevant area of inquiry. He's a crummy philosopher. He doesn't have the rudimentary skills to meticulously assess his own arguments.
Genius guy, though.
Very smart guy. A little bit of a reptile, but a very smart guy.
If you have two distinguished scientists, and in fact you can range many more on each side, as you know, saying exactly opposite things, that's telling me that the conflict is not between science and belief in God. Otherwise, you'd expect all scientists to be atheists. But it's a worldview conflict. It's between scientists who have different worldviews.
My deep regret is some people are so deeply entrenched in their own worldviews that they will simply not countenance alternatives.
I'd seen the chilling effect that this unquestioning devotion to Darwinism has had on science, but were there other consequences?
No gods, no life after death, no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no human free will are all deeply connected to an evolutionary perspective. You're here today and you're gone tomorrow, and that's all there is to it.
Dr. Will Provine, professor of the history of biology at Cornell University, gave us another disturbing glimpse into where Darwinism can lead.
Oh, I was a Christian, but I never heard anything about evolution because it was illegal to teach it in Tennessee.
Dr. Provine's first biology professor changed all that.
He started talking about evolution as if it had no design in it whatsoever. And I came up to him and I said, "You've left out the most important part." And he said, "If you feel the same way at the end of one quarter, I want you to stand up in front of the students in this class and tell them this deep lack in evolution." And I read that book so carefully, and I could find no sign of there being any design whatsoever in evolution. And I immediately began to doubt the existence of a deity. But it starts by giving up an active deity. Then it gives up the hope that there's any life after death. When you give those two up, the rest of it follows fairly easily. You give up the hope that there's an immanent morality. And finally, there's no human free will. If you believe in evolution, you can't hope for there being any free will. There's no hope whatsoever of there being any deep meaning in human life. We live, we die, and we're gone.
And it was then, when I discovered evolution, when I discovered Darwinism, that I realized there's this magnificently elegant, stunningly elegant explanation, which I didn't quite understand to begin with. When I did understand it, then that finally killed off my remaining religious faith.
After hearing these stories, I was not surprised to discover that most evolutionary biologists share Professor Dawkins' views. It appears Darwinism does lead to atheism.
Religion, I mean, it's just fantasy, basically. It's completely empty of any explanatory content. And it's evil as well.
The connection between Hitler and Darwin is, of course, historically a difficult connection because they were separated by a good many years. One was English, one was German. Nonetheless, if you open Mein Kampf and read it, especially if you can read it in German, The correspondence between Darwinian ideas and Nazi ideas just leaps from the page. Of course, you have to add every historical caution. Not everyone who read Darwin became a Nazi. Obviously not. No one is making that case. Darwinism is not a sufficient condition for a phenomenon like Nazism, but I think it's certainly a necessary one.
So what is this place?
During Second World War, 15,000 people were killed here.
Why were they killed?
They were killed because they were people with handicaps.
Why kill them? What's the point of killing them?
People who were not able to work, people who were not able to live by themselves, that they were useless eaters.
Useless eaters.
And life unworthy of living. This idea grew up in the 20s. So long before National Socialism, biologists, anthropologists, they thought that maybe mankind could, or the government could interfere into the growth of the population.
I see.
And they had the utopia.
This was a Darwinian concept.
Yes.
And also a Malthusian concept, very much Malthusian. So what is this?
This is the dissection table.
Do you ever think to yourself, the sane ones were the ones lying here having their brains removed? The insane one was Dr. Gorgas and all the other people
No.
did?
No, I don't think that, because I think those people who killed here, they were very sane, because they had their purposes.
They had purposes?
Yes. I don't think they were insane. And they killed about 70 people.
A day?
So a day, so they had...
That's barely enough time.
And they only killed from Monday to Friday. So...
Because the people who were doing the killing needed to have the weekend off.
Hitler and many of the physicians that carried out this program were very fanatical Darwinists, and particularly they wanted to apply Darwinism to society.
Wir müssen einen neuen Menschen nehmen, auf das unser Volk nicht an den typischen Degenerationserscheinungen dieser neuen Zeit zugrunde geht.
Many of these people in the 19-teens, 1920s, who were putting forward some of these ideas about racism were considered the leading scientists. These were Darwinists who were taken seriously by fellow academics. It's not to say that all academics believed it.
These leading academics, were there any of them who were Americans?
There were plenty of Americans who were saying similar kinds of things.
Not only were Americans saying such things, they were pioneers in this fledgling science known as eugenics. They thought they could help evolution along by sterilizing the so-called feeble-minded and prohibiting them from getting married.
Physicians who are aware of the history of 20th century American medicine harbor some bad feelings towards Darwinists because of eugenics. And the eugenics, which was an attempt to breed human beings, it was the darkest chapter of American medicine ever. There were 50,000 people involuntarily sterilized because they were deemed unfit to breed, basically.
Sometimes those categories overlapped because sometimes they thought that these people were political enemies because they were inferior biologically. The war itself was part of the Darwinian struggle for existence for Hitler. And he saw the extermination of the Jews as one of those fronts to this warfare going on as this Darwinian struggle for existence.
Would you say that Hitler was insane?
No, I wouldn't say he was insane. I think he had imbibed some very, very wrong ideas. And in fact, I think he took the logic of them in certain ways that brought him to take very radical solutions for them.
First of all, if you take seriously that evolution has to do with, the transition of life forms and that life and death are just natural processes, then one gets to be liberal about abortion and euthanasia. All of those kinds of ideas seem to me follow very naturally from a Darwinian perspective, a deprivileging of human beings, basically.
Hello, Professor Dawkins. How are you? I'm Ben Stein. I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
You have written that God is a psychotic delinquent invented by mad, deluded people.
No, I didn't say quite that. I said something rather better than that.
Oh, well, please tell us what you said. Please tell us what you said.
Well, I would have to read it from the book.
No, please.
The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
So that's what you think of God?
Yeah.
How about if people believed in a God of infinite lovingness and kindness and forgiveness and generosity, sort of like the modern day God? Why spoil it for them? Why not just let them have their fun and enjoy it?
I mean, I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. I write a book, people can read it if they want to. I believe that it is a liberating thing to free yourself from primitive superstition.
So religion is a primitive superstition?
Oh, I think it is, yes.
So you believe it's liberating to tell people that there is no God?
I think a lot of people, when they give up God, feel a great sense of release and freedom.
Why do you think that? I mean, what's your dad? What's your scientist? What's your data?
I think, well, I've had a lot of letters saying that, and I've...
There are 8 billion people in the world, Dr. Dawkins. How many letters have you had?
No, I haven't done that. That's quite true.
Professor Dawkins seemed so convinced that God doesn't exist that I wondered if he would be willing to put a number on it.
Well, it's hard to put a figure on it, but I mean, I'd put it as something like, 99% against or something.
Well, how do you know it's 99% against, say, in 97%?
No, I did. You asked me to put a figure on it, and I'm not comfortable putting a figure on it. I think I just think it's very unlikely.
What? But you couldn't put a number on it?
No, of course not. No.
So it could be 49%.
Well, it would be. I mean, I think it's unlikely, but it's quite far from 50%.
How do you know?
I don't know. I mean, I put an argument in the book.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. So the Hebrew God, the God of the Old Testament, he doesn't exist in your view?
Certainly. I mean, that would be a very unpleasant prospect.
And the Holy Trinity of the New Testament,
nothing like that.
Do you believe in any of the Hindu gods? Like Vishnu?
How can you ask such a question?
You don't,
right? How could I? I mean, why would I, given that I don't believe in any others?
You don't believe in the Muslim God?
No. I mean, why do you even need to ask?
Well, I just wanted to be sure. So you don't believe in any God anywhere?
Any God anywhere would be completely incompatible with anything that I've said.
I assume. I just wanted to make sure you don't believe in any God anywhere.
No.
What if after you died you ran into God? He said, "What have you been doing, Richard? I mean, what have you been doing? I've been trying to be nice to you. I gave you a multi-million-dollar paycheck over and over again with your book, and look what you did."
Bertrand Russell had that point put to him, and he said something like, "Sir, why did you take such pains to hide yourself?"
But if the intelligent design people are right, God isn't hidden. We may even be able to encounter God through science, if we have the freedom to go there. What could be more intriguing than that?
If you believe in God, and you believe that there's an intrinsic order in the universe, and you believe that it's the role of science to try to pursue and understand better that order, you will be ostracized.
And I believe that science gives us one perspective on the world, and our religious insight gives us another perspective on the world. And by putting the two together, we will see more deeply and more truly.
And if we will stand up for freedom,
freedom is the victor.
And if we all do that, we will overcome. I've taken a first step by speaking out on this issue. But if the wall is to come down, we all have to do our part. Some of you will pay a heavy price for speaking out. You may even lose your job. I guarantee you'll get hate email. But if you don't get involved, will anyone be left to carry on this struggle? Anyone? Anyone?